There are moments when a single sentence does more damage than 1,000 rumors, and if you stay with this until the very end, you are going to witness how 5 simple words turned an entire narrative upside down. Because when Bai Lu finally said, "I never texted him," she did not just deny a claim. She shattered a story that had already taken on a life of its own, and now the question is no longer what people believed before. It is what happens when everything they thought was true suddenly no longer makes sense. It started like all stories that move too fast to be controlled. A whisper, a screenshot, a conversation that seemed too real to question. Names attached, timing that appeared believable, and a sequence of messages that people did not hesitate to accept as fact. Because when something feels detailed, it feels true. And when it feels true, it spreads without resistance. Soon, the connection between Dylan Wang and Bai Lu became the center of attention again. Not because of anything they publicly confirmed, but because of what everyone believed was happening behind the scenes. Late-night texts, repeated notifications, moments that supposedly explained everything that had been quietly building. It all fit together too easily. And that was exactly why no one stopped to question it. At first, Bai Lu said nothing. Not because she did not see what was happening, but because sometimes speaking too early only feeds the noise. She watched as the narrative grew, as more details were added, as assumptions became statements, and statements became accepted truth. Meanwhile, Dylan Wang found himself caught in the middle of something that was moving faster than he could respond to. Because once a story reaches a certain speed, it no longer waits for confirmation. It simply continues. Every glance, every interaction, every silence was now being interpreted through the lens of those messages. And the longer the situation went without clarification, the stronger the belief became. Until finally, the moment arrived that no one expected. A quiet setting, no dramatic stage, no press conference. Just a moment where Bai Lu decided that silence was no longer the right choice. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. She did not react emotionally. She simply said the words. "I never texted him." At first, it felt almost too simple. Too direct. Because people were expecting explanation, justification, something complex. But what they received instead was clarity. And clarity has a way of cutting through confusion instantly. The reaction was immediate. Shock. Disbelief. Questions that replaced the certainty people had just moments before. Because if those messages were not from her, then what were they? Where did they come from? And why did they look so convincing? The story that once felt complete suddenly felt incomplete. And that incompleteness created something even more powerful than the original rumor. Doubt. Across online platforms, discussions shifted. Not from what happened, but from what might have happened. People began re-examining everything. The timing, the tone, the details that once seemed perfect now felt slightly off. And once something feels off, it is impossible to ignore. Dylan Wang heard her statement. And for the first time since the situation began, there was a pause in his reaction. Not because he did not understand what she said, but because it changed the foundation of everything he thought he was dealing with. If the messages were not from Bai Lu, then the distance he felt, the tension that had been building, the assumptions that had shaped his actions, all of it had to be reconsidered. That realization did not come with immediate answers. It came with more questions. And questions are often more difficult than answers, because they force you to look at things from a different perspective. Meanwhile, Bai Lu remained steady. Not defensive, not reactive, just consistent. Because once you say something that clearly, repeating it is not necessary. Her confidence did not come from proving anything. It came from knowing the truth of what she said. And that confidence became part of the story itself. Now the focus was no longer just on the denial. It was on what that denial meant. Who created the illusion? Why it was created? And how something so convincing could exist without being real. As the narrative shifted again, something else became clear. This was no longer just about messages. It was about perception. About how easily something can be accepted when it fits what people expect to see. And how quickly that acceptance can turn into certainty. until one moment changes everything. The silence that followed Bai Lu's statement was different from the silence before. Before, it was filled with speculation. Now, it was filled with reconsideration. And in that space, the truth began to feel more important than the story. Dylan Wang found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. Not just the messages, but the reactions, the distance, the decisions that were influenced by something that might not have been real at all. That realization carried weight, because it meant that something external had the power to shape something personal. And that is never easy to accept. At the same time, Xinyu was not untouched by what had unfolded, because even though the situation did not begin with her, it affected everything around her. And now, with the truth shifting again, she had to decide what she believed. Not what she saw, not what she heard, but what she trusted. And trust, once shaken, does not rebuild instantly. It takes time. It takes clarity. And sometimes it takes distance. The story that once seemed so clear now stood in a completely different light. No longer a simple narrative, but a layered situation with pieces that did not align the way people thought they did. And that is where everything becomes more complicated. Because when something breaks apart like that, it does not return to the way it was. It becomes something new. Something that has to be understood all over again. So now the question is no longer whether Bai Lu sent those messages. She has already answered that. The question is what happens next. When a story built on certainty is replaced with uncertainty. When actions taken under one belief are re-examined under another. And when the truth, simple as it may be, changes everything that came before it. If you have followed this far, then you already understand that this is not just about denial. It is about how quickly perception can become reality, and how powerful it is when that reality is challenged. So now ask yourself, if something you believed completely turned out to be different from what you thought, would you hold on to the story? Or would you accept the truth even if it changes everything? The moment those 5 words settled into the silence, everything that followed was no longer about rumors, it was about consequences, and if you stay with this until the very end, you're going to see how one statement from Bai Lu forced everyone involved to confront a reality they were not prepared for, because when the truth shifts, it does not just correct the story, it reshapes everything built on it. At first, nothing happened. No immediate reactions. No dramatic responses. Just a pause that felt heavier than anything that had come before it. Because for the first time, people were not reacting to new information. They were trying to process what they had already accepted as truth. Across every conversation, the same question began to surface. If she never sent those messages, then what exactly had everyone been looking at? The screenshots, the timing, the details that once felt too precise to be false. Now they felt too perfect to be real. And once doubt enters something that once felt certain, it spreads quickly. Dylan Wang did not respond publicly. Not immediately. Because sometimes the most important reactions happen in private before they are ever seen. He went back to everything. Every message he thought he understood. Every moment that had influenced how he felt. Every decision he made based on what he believed was happening. And as he looked at it again, something became clear. The situation was never as simple as it seemed. Because if the messages were not from Bai Lu, then the distance he felt, the tension that had been building, the shifts in how things changed, all of it had been shaped by something else. Something he had not questioned at the time. That realization did not come with relief. It came with weight, because it meant that something external had the power to influence something personal. And that kind of influence is not easy to accept. Meanwhile, Xinyu found herself standing at the center of a completely different kind of silence. Before, the situation had felt clear. Not comfortable, but understandable. Now it felt uncertain, because the foundation of what she believed had shifted. And when the foundation shifts, everything built on it has to be reconsidered. She did not react immediately either, because reacting too quickly would mean responding to something that was still unfolding. Instead, she stepped back. Not emotionally, but intentionally. Because clarity requires distance when everything becomes unclear. Days passed in a way that felt different from before. No new rumors. No additional leaks. Just a quiet space where everyone involved had to face what was left behind after the noise disappeared. And in that space, the truth began to settle. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Bai Lu remained consistent. She did not repeat herself unnecessarily. She did not try to convince anyone. Because once you say something with certainty, repeating it does not make it stronger. It simply confirms that it has not changed. Her silence after that statement became just as powerful as the statement itself, because it showed that she was not reacting to the situation. She was standing in it. And that kind of presence is difficult to challenge. Eventually, the moment came when everything had to be addressed directly. Not through assumptions, not through interpretation, but through conversation. Dylan Wang reached out, not with accusations, not with explanations, but with a question. A real one. The kind that seeks understanding instead of confirmation. And when Bai Lu responded, it was exactly what she had already said. Nothing more, nothing less. She never sent those messages. And that clarity did not create conflict. It created something else. A shift. Because now the focus was no longer between them. It was on everything that had existed around them. The source. The origin. The reason something like that appeared in the first place. And while that question remained unanswered, something more important began to take shape. Accountability. Not for the messages themselves, but for the reactions that followed them. The distance that formed. The assumptions that influenced decisions. The moments that changed because of something that was never confirmed. And that is where the real ending begins. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with a public resolution. But with a quiet understanding. Dylan Wang realized that some of the tension he felt was not created intentionally. It was built through interpretation. Through belief. Through something that seemed real at the time. And Shinyu realized that decisions made under uncertainty do not always reflect the full truth. But they still have consequences. And Bai Lu remained exactly where she had been from the start. Certain. Clear. Unchanged. The final moment did not come with a headline. It came with a choice. Not spoken loudly, but understood by all of them. To move forward. Not by pretending nothing happened, but by accepting that what happened was shaped by something that no longer holds the same meaning. And sometimes that is the only way forward. To acknowledge the past without letting it define what comes next. So this story does not end with a dramatic reveal. It ends with something far more real. Clarity. Because once the truth is spoken, even if it comes late, it has the power to reset everything that came before it. And now the question is not who is right or wrong. The question is whether what remains after the truth is enough to rebuild what was once there.